Teenage years are perhaps the most vulnerable period in a person's life. It's a time when individuals are no longer children, but not yet fully formed adults. They are still naive and carefree, but often keep secrets, sometimes out of fear or embarrassment. Sadly, an inability to share those struggles with a trusted parent or loved one can sometimes lead to tragedy. The case of Justice Garrett, who was just 16 and whose life was tragically cut short in 2018, has rocked the state of Florida. For her mother, it was a devastating revelation. She hadn't noticed or understood the nightmare her daughter had been enduring. Justice's story is one of a terrible secret she kept, fearing judgment, a silence that ultimately led to an unimaginable tragedy that ended her life. Justice Mary Garrett was born on March 19, 2002, and was the eldest of two daughters in the family of Danielle and Sebastian Garrett. She grew up alongside her younger sister, Jeanette, who was 10 years younger. Most of Justice's childhood and teenage years were spent in the small town of New Smyrna Beach, located in Volusia County, Florida. In 2016, Justice's parents divorced, and the sisters stayed with their mother. About a year later, Danielle met a man named Robert Kern, with whom she soon began a romantic relationship. By the fall of 2017, Danielle, along with her two daughters, moved to the tiny rural town of Sorrento, Florida, with a population of just over 1,000, and moved into Robert's home. Justice struggled the most with the move and found it difficult to adapt to the new environment. First, she deeply missed her close friends who remained in New Smyrna Beach. Second, as a high school student, she had to transfer schools in the middle of the academic year. Third, she didn't like her new home or her mother's partner. Despite her frustrations, Justice tried not to create problems and behaved respectfully. Known for her social, friendly, and humorous nature, Justice quickly made friends at her new school. She became especially close to a classmate named Rochelle, and the two were practically inseparable. Justice frequently stayed over at Rochelle's house, and the girls even listed each other as sisters on social media. On Friday, April 13, 2018, Justice overslept and missed the school bus. She hurriedly prepared for class and didn't have time for breakfast. That day, her younger sister was feeling unwell and stayed home, while her mother planned to take Jeanette to the hospital. Justice decided to take a public bus to school, which was only a couple of stops away. She packed her backpack, said goodbye to her mother, and left the house. That was the last time anyone saw Justice alive. When Justice didn't come home from school on time, Danielle wasn't alarmed. She assumed her daughter had gone to Rochelle's house after class, as she often did. By evening, Danielle believed that Justice had decided to stay overnight at her friend's house, something she had been doing frequently. Even the fact that Justice's phone was turned off didn't immediately concern her. However, on Saturday morning, Danielle received a call from Rochelle, who nervously asked if everything was okay with Justice. Danielle, feeling a sudden chill run down her spine, asked in a trembling voice if Justice hadn't stayed over at Rochelle's house. The response left her shocked. Rochelle revealed that she hadn't seen Justice since Thursday. Justice hadn't shown up for school on Friday, and her phone had been off for nearly 2 days. Danielle panicked. After several failed attempts to contact her daughter, she rushed to the local police station and filed a missing person report. The search for Justice began immediately. When officers learned that Justice had moved to the area only 6 months earlier, they initially assumed she might have traveled back to her old town to visit friends for the weekend. Teenagers at that age often leave home impulsively, whether in protest or for other reasons, so authorities considered it likely that she would resurface soon. However, Danielle insisted that her daughter would never do such a thing without letting her know. The first step was to determine Justice's circle of acquaintances and see if she had a boyfriend, any recent arguments or other details that might help piece together the events of the day she was last seen. Justice hadn't taken any money with her, and all her belongings remained at home. Her phone became unreachable shortly after she left for school. Her social media accounts showed no activity since late Thursday night, and she hadn't responded to any calls or messages. None of her friends had any idea where she could be, as she hadn't contacted or reached out to anyone. According to her family and close friends, Justice didn't drink alcohol or experiment with prohibited substances. She wasn't in a relationship and had never been involved in serious romantic commitments. Justice didn't associate with negative influences, had no conflicts with others, and had never broken the law. Teachers at her school described her positively, and her peers generally saw her as kind, compassionate, and sweet. Police quickly checked all local crime reports, incidents, and traffic accidents throughout the area. They considered the possibility that she might have been involved in an accident and was unable to communicate. However, there were no records of her being involved in any such events. Using data from her phone, investigators were able to track her movements on the morning she disappeared. Around 7:30 a.m., Justice left her home and began walking toward the school. Approximately 15 minutes later, her movements became unusual. She stopped for a moment, then abruptly changed direction. Shortly afterward, her phone was turned off. Justice's disappearance sparked rumors and speculation throughout the small, quiet town. In a community where little ever happened, any incident became the center of attention, quickly spreading through gossip and often embellished with falsehoods. For some locals, rumors were a form of entertainment, and they saw no harm in passing them along. While Justice's friends and many classmates genuinely wanted to help the investigation, others saw the situation as an opportunity to gain attention, boost their own importance, or even achieve a fleeting sense of notoriety. Several people claimed to have seen Justice Garrett in different parts of town. Some said she got into a mysterious black car with tinted windows. Others suggested she was walking with a group of nonconformist teens, and a few even speculated she had been recruited into a religious sect. These rumors seemed to come out of nowhere, and it was difficult for investigators to separate fact from fiction. As a result, every piece of information, no matter how implausible, had to be checked thoroughly. One student, a girl a grade above Justice, stood out with her behavior. She started an entire blog dedicated to Justice's disappearance, claiming the teen had run away with a secret boyfriend and was expecting his child. The girl was simply seeking attention and popularity at school, spreading sensationalized and entirely fabricated stories. Her actions led to disciplinary measures, and she was temporarily suspended from school during the investigation. Additionally, her social media accounts were deactivated for spreading false information. On April 17th, 4 days after Justice's disappearance, a man made a chilling call to the police. He reported finding something disturbing in a wooded area on the outskirts of DeLand. The man, an avid runner, often jogged along a secluded trail that wound through a park and into the forest. That morning, as he ventured deeper into the woods, he noticed a strong, unpleasant smell of decay. Initially, he assumed it was the carcass of a dead animal and thought about reporting it to the appropriate services to have it removed. However, his curiosity got the better of him, and he decided to investigate the source of the odor himself. The runner stepped off the trail and walked about 15 feet into the brush. There, he came across a gruesome sight, a heavily decomposed human body, disfigured beyond recognition. Judging by the long hair and remnants of clothing, it appeared to be a young woman. The man immediately called law enforcement and waited on the trail to ensure he didn't accidentally disturb potential evidence. When officers arrived, they conducted a thorough examination of the area and the remains. It became clear that this was the scene of a violent crime, and the victim was indeed a very young woman. Her clothing was torn, and her undergarments were missing, indicating that the nature of the crime was likely of an intimate and aggressive nature. There were noticeable bite marks on the legs, likely from wild animals, but the most severe damage had been caused by a corrosive chemical. This substance had eroded the girl's face down to the bone and had also been poured over her chest, lower abdomen, and intimate areas. It was clear that the perpetrator had attempted not only to disfigure the victim, but also to eliminate any traces of DNA, a tactic that, as it turned out, was successful. From the start, investigators suspected that the body found in the woods belonged to the girl who had gone missing days earlier. However, due to the extensive chemical damage and decomposition, DNA testing was required for confirmation. Tragically, The Garrett family's worst fears were realized. Justice had been found dead. Her remains were discovered about a 30-minute drive from the town where she lived. Evidence suggested that she had been severely beaten before the crime, as her nose, cheekbone, and several ribs were broken. Due to the advanced state of decomposition, the exact cause of death could not be definitively determined, but it was presumed to be mechanical asphyxiation. A suspicious stranger. The man who discovered the remains provided valuable information during his interview with police. He explained that he frequently ran along the same trail every other day. 2 days before finding the body, he had noticed a suspicious man emerging from the woods near the area where Justice's remains were later found. The witness couldn't provide a detailed description of the man, as he had only seen him briefly from behind and at a considerable distance. He described the individual as a white male, short in height, with a stocky build, wearing jeans and a black hoodie. The man quickly left the area after noticing that he wasn't alone and disappeared behind the trees. At the time, the runner found the encounter odd, but didn't think much of it. There was no noticeable odor of decomposition that day, so he dismissed the interaction from his mind. However, after discovering the remains 2 days later, he recalled the strange man on the trail and reported the incident to authorities. Detectives immediately suspected that the stranger in the woods might have been the perpetrator responsible for the crime. It was possible he had returned to the scene to cover his tracks and destroy evidence. Experts determined that the corrosive substance used on the body was chlorine bleach. The combination of the chemical and the area's humid climate accelerated decomposition, rendering the remains unrecognizable. The jogger, however, was ruled out as a suspect after successfully passing a polygraph test and providing a solid alibi for the day Justice disappeared. According to Justice's mother, her daughter had planned to take a public bus to school that morning. However, surveillance footage from street cameras revealed that Justice never approached the bus stop. Adding to the mystery, a neighbor mentioned seeing Justice get into a car belonging to her stepfather, Robert. This revelation completely changed the direction of the investigation, as detectives now had to re-interview the teenager's parents to determine why they hadn't been truthful. Danielle quickly confessed, explaining that her partner, Robert Kern, had recently been temporarily stripped of his driver's license. However, since her daughter was running late that morning, he agreed to give her a ride. Danielle had withheld this information to avoid causing trouble for Robert. At the time of the initial interview, she believed Justice was still alive and would return home soon. Detectives immediately requested footage from surveillance cameras near the school to verify the stepfather's story. However, the recordings revealed that Robert had not dropped Justice off at school or anywhere nearby. His car was not captured on any cameras along the route to the school. So, where had they gone? With this new information, it became clear that Robert was likely the last person to see Justice alive. When questioned again, Robert admitted to driving Justice that morning despite his suspended license. According to him, Justice had begged him to take her not to school, but to a neighboring town, DeLand, where she supposedly had a planned meeting with a secret boyfriend. Robert claimed he didn't know the name of the person she was meeting and had initially refused to take her there. However, he eventually gave in to her pleas, hoping to improve their strained relationship. Justice allegedly made him promise not to tell her mother about this outing. She assured him that she would return on her own later in the day and mentioned that being Friday, she planned to stay overnight at a friend's house. Robert agreed, as he didn't see anything unusual or concerning about the situation. This revelation introduced a new suspect into the case, a possible secret boyfriend. Investigators needed to identify and locate him as soon as possible. He could either be involved in Justice's disappearance, or, at the very least, be the last person to have seen her alive. To begin the search, law enforcement decided to review Justice's contacts and activity on social media. Since her phone had not been recovered, detectives seized her laptop, and what they discovered raised more questions. Justice had multiple accounts across various social platforms where she frequently interacted with both real-life and online friends. However, no romantic conversations or evidence of a boyfriend were found. One account, however, stood out as particularly unusual and suspicious. This profile quickly became the focus of investigators as they worked to uncover its owner and its potential connection to Justice's disappearance. A young man named Kevin had been showing an unusual amount of interest in Justice Garrett in recent months. He messaged her daily, liked her posts, and left compliments under her photos. However, Justice seemed uninterested. She rarely replied to him, often ignored his messages, and showed no desire to maintain contact. Friends of Justice later confirmed that she had mentioned a persistent admirer who constantly messaged her on social media, but she found him annoying rather than flattering. From Kevin's profile, he appeared to be 2 years older than Justice and lived in the same town. His page featured only a few photos, showing an athletic and attractive young man. However, none of Justice's friends or family had ever seen him in person. Soon, it was discovered that the account was fake, and the photos had been taken from the internet. Specialists quickly accessed the account and traced its creation details. The investigation revealed that the account did not belong to a teenager at all, but was instead tied to an adult man, Robert Kern. Justice's stepfather was called back for questioning. Detectives asked why he had created a fake account to interact with his stepdaughter and why he hadn't disclosed this earlier. Robert appeared surprised that investigators had uncovered his connection to the account, but quickly composed himself and offered an explanation. According to him, he had set up the account to boost Justice's self-esteem, claiming that as the new girl in town and at school, she might appreciate receiving compliments from a seemingly attractive young man. While it was true that Justice was new to the area, as mentioned earlier, she had quickly integrated into her school community and made many friends. However, those close to her had recently noticed changes in her behavior. The once cheerful and carefree teenager had become increasingly tense and nervous. She didn't share the reasons for this shift with anyone, but she frequently stayed over at her best friend Rochelle's house. In fact, Justice spent so much time there that it was as if she had moved in, though she never confided in Rochelle about what was troubling her. According to Rochelle, Justice's stepfather had come to her house several times to pick Justice up and bring her home. Each time, Justice seemed visibly nervous and would try to avoid leaving with him. She would call her mother, begging to stay a few more nights at Rochelle's, promising to complete all her chores and focus on schoolwork in exchange. Danielle often gave in to these requests. Robert and Justice had reportedly had a strained relationship from the start, something well known among her friends. However, Justice never accused him of aggression or inappropriate behavior. Likewise, those around her, including her mother, had never observed anything that seemed out of line in Robert's interactions with his stepdaughter. With mounting suspicion surrounding him, Robert Kern became the main and only suspect in the investigation into Justice's tragic death. Police detained him for further questioning, while simultaneously delving into his past and lifestyle. Robert, 43 years old, had a long history of legal trouble, including convictions for burglary, possession of prohibited substances, and physical altercations. His criminal record had made it nearly impossible for him to secure stable employment. He occasionally worked illegally as a carpenter at a local sawmill, taking on odd jobs to make ends meet. Detectives were now focused on connecting the dots between Robert's questionable past, his behavior toward Justice, and the events that led to the horrific crime. Robert had carefully concealed his past from everyone around him, including Danielle, who had no idea she was living with a man with a criminal history. When investigators revealed the truth about him, she was stunned and finally spoke up. Danielle admitted that Robert had volunteered to drive Justice to school that day, even though Justice had protested against it. When Justice didn't return home, Danielle grew worried, but Robert reassured her that Justice was spending the night at her friend Rochelle's house. He even forbade her from calling the police or reaching out to Rochelle. Investigators examined Robert's devices and discovered that in the months leading up to Justice's disappearance, he had been frequently searching online for information about substances that could render a person unconscious or unable to move. He had also looked into purchasing such substances on the dark web and it appeared he had successfully done so. But that wasn't all. Robert had also researched ways to eliminate DNA evidence from a body, focusing on household chemicals, including bleach and disinfectants. He had even reviewed satellite maps of nearby wooded areas, particularly the outskirts of DeLand, where Justice's body was later found. It became clear that Robert had been meticulously planning for months to carry out his crime, dispose of the body, and erase all traces of evidence. As for his motive, it seemed evident from the beginning. Robert had developed an inappropriate obsession with justice and realized that the only way to act on his twisted desires was through force. To avoid facing legal consequences for his actions, he had decided to eliminate her entirely. The final doubts about Robert's involvement were dispelled when investigators reviewed his phone's geolocation data from that day. He had driven with Justice away from their home in the direction of her school, but then abruptly turned toward a remote area and stopped. It was likely at this moment that Robert used a chemical, possibly chloroform, to incapacitate Justice and turned off her phone. However, he failed to deactivate his own device, which recorded his movements. Afterward, Robert's vehicle was tracked heading toward DeLand, where it stopped for approximately an hour. This time frame would have given him enough time to assault Justice, physically harm her, take her life by strangulation, and hide her body in the woods. On that day, he had with him a small bottle of a chlorine-based substance, which he poured over her face and other areas to destroy potential evidence. However, Robert grew anxious, fearing he might have left traces behind. 2 days later, he returned to the scene with a large container of bleach. He then poured the chemical extensively over Justice's head, chest, and lower body in a final attempt to destroy any remaining evidence linking him to the crime. That morning, when the assailant returned to the crime scene for a second time, he was spotted by the jogger who later discovered Justice's body and reported it to the police. As for Kern's alibi, it quickly fell apart. Working unofficially at a local sawmill, he had asked 2 colleagues to claim he arrived on time that day, even though he was nearly 2 hours late. Under further questioning, both witnesses admitted the truth after being warned they could face charges for perjury and concealing evidence related to a violent crime. Robert Kern denied all charges, but the evidence against him was overwhelming, leading the case to trial. Witness testimony painted a picture of Justice living in constant fear during the last few months of her life, avoiding home as much as possible. However, she never shared her concerns, not even with her mother. Danielle, blinded by her affection for her new partner, failed to notice the situation unfolding around her and never questioned Kern about his past. Prosecutors systematically dismantled Kern's claims, proving he had meticulously planned this heinous act, fully intending to ensure Justice wouldn't survive. Moss and soil samples from the site where Justice's body was found were matched to particles discovered on Kern's car mats, further linking him to the crime scene. However, the allegations of an intimate assault could not be conclusively proven, as all DNA evidence and tissue samples had been destroyed by the corrosive chemical Kern used, which had eaten away at the victim's remains down to the bone. In August 2022, nearly 2.5 years after the crime, Kern was convicted of premeditated, violent murder. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, ensuring he will never be released.